The Civil War finally ended in April 1865. It had been a long, bloody fight. The Union won. The Confederacy lost. The country was broken. It needed to be put back together. People called this period Reconstruction. Nobody knew exactly how to do it. There were big questions. What about the former slaves? What about the southern states? Should they be punished or forgiven? President Abraham Lincoln had a plan. He wanted to be kind. He wanted to heal the nation quickly. He talked about malice toward none, with charity for all. He believed in a gentle approach. He thought the southern states should come back into the Union easily. But then, just days after the war ended, Lincoln was shot. John Wilkes Booth killed him. It was a huge shock. The country lost its leader, and with him, much of his hopeful, forgiving spirit for Reconstruction. Lincoln's death meant the vice president took over. That was Andrew Johnson. Johnson was a very different man from Lincoln. Lincoln was a Republican. Johnson was a Democrat. He was from Tennessee, a southern state. But Johnson had stayed loyal to the Union. When Tennessee seceded, he did not. He was the only senator from a Confederate state to stay in Congress. Lincoln made him military governor of Tennessee during the war. Then Lincoln chose him as his running mate in 1864. This was a political move. Lincoln wanted to show national unity. He wanted to bring in pro-Union Democrats. He thought this would help win the election. It did. But now Johnson was president. He faced an impossible task. He had to rebuild a nation that hated itself, and he did not have Lincoln's touch. And Johnson was a tough man. He was self-made. He had no formal schooling. He rose from poverty to become a tailor, then a politician. He was stubborn. He believed in the Constitution strictly. He thought states had a lot of power. And he had strong views about race. He did not believe in full equality for black people. This was a big problem for many in the North. The mood in Congress was also very different from Johnson's. Most members were Republicans. Many of them were radical Republicans. They felt angry at the South. They wanted to punish the former Confederates. They wanted to protect the rights of newly freed slaves. They saw the war as a fight against slavery, not just for the Union. They believed the federal government had to step in. It had to force changes on the South. They did not trust white Southerners. They did not trust Johnson. He was a Southerner, after all, even if he stayed with the Union. So, from the very start, there was a deep division. Johnson wanted a lenient Reconstruction. He wanted the southern states to rejoin fast. He wanted white Southerners to regain power. He quickly issued pardons to many former Confederates. He let southern states elect new governments. These new governments often passed black codes. These laws limited the rights of black people. They were almost like slavery again. This outraged Congress. Congress had its own plan. It wanted a harsh Reconstruction. It wanted to make sure the South changed. It wanted to protect black civil rights. It did not think Johnson was doing enough. It saw his actions as a betrayal. It felt he was letting the South off too easy. And it worried he would undo all the Union's gains from the war. Congress had many ideas for new laws. These laws would give more power to the federal government. They would protect black voting rights. They would put the South under military control. These were all things Johnson opposed. The clash started immediately. Congress refused to seat the new Southern representatives. They had been elected under Johnson's lenient plan. Congress said those states were not ready. It said they were not truly reconstructed. It set up a committee to study Reconstruction. This committee would come up with its own plan. Johnson felt Congress was overstepping its bounds. He believed the president, not Congress, should lead Reconstruction. He saw Congress as trying to take away his power. This disagreement grew into a full-blown fight. It was not just about policy, it was about who controlled the government. Was it the president or Congress? Johnson often vetoed bills passed by Congress. He thought they were unconstitutional, but Congress had enough votes. It usually overrode his vetoes. This showed how little power Johnson actually had, and it showed how much Congress disliked him. This was the tense atmosphere when the issue of a cabinet member came up. It was a boiling pot, and the lid was about to blow off. Johnson was alone. He had few allies. Congress was united against him. The stage was set for a major crisis. At the center of this brewing storm was a man named Edwin Stanton. He was the Secretary of War. Stanton was a complex figure. He had served under Lincoln. He was a vital part of Lincoln's war effort. Stanton was brilliant. He was very organized. He was also known for his difficult personality. He was blunt. He could be rude. He was very ambitious. But nobody doubted his loyalty to the Union cause, and he was incredibly effective at his job. He managed the vast Union army during the war. He made sure soldiers had supplies. He oversaw military movements. He was key to the Union victory. When Lincoln died, Johnson became president. Johnson kept Lincoln's entire cabinet at first. This was a common practice. It showed continuity. It showed respect for the previous administration. Johnson hoped it would ease the transition. He hoped it would show the country he could lead, and he needed experienced people. Stanton was one of those people. He knew the War Department inside and out. He had the trust of the Army. He also had the trust of many in Congress, especially the radical Republicans. They saw him as one of them. But Stanton and Johnson were very different. Their views on Reconstruction were miles apart. Johnson, as we know, wanted a quick, lenient approach. He wanted to restore the southern states quickly. He did not want to protect black rights through federal power. Stanton, on the other hand, was a strong believer in congressional Reconstruction. He sided with the radical Republicans. He thought the South needed to be truly reformed. He believed in using federal power to protect black citizens. He saw Johnson's policies as a betrayal of what the war had fought for. This difference in views quickly led to friction. Stanton remained in Johnson's cabinet. But he did not support Johnson's policies. He often openly disagreed with the president. He leaked information to Congress. He gave advice to Johnson's political enemies. He acted more like an agent for Congress within the administration. He saw it as his duty. He felt he was protecting the country from Johnson's wrong-headed policies, but Johnson saw it as insubordination. He saw it as betrayal. It became an impossible situation for Johnson. He had a cabinet member who worked against him. He had a Secretary of War who was actively undermining his authority. This was not a small problem. The Secretary of War controlled the Army, and the Army was central to Reconstruction. It was enforcing federal laws in the South, it was overseeing elections, it was maintaining order. Johnson needed a Secretary of War who was loyal to his vision, not to Congress's vision. Johnson tried to get rid of other cabinet members he did not trust, but Stanton was different. He had strong support in Congress. He was seen as a hero by many. Removing him would be a huge political fight. And Johnson was already losing most of his fights with Congress. He was isolated. His own party, the Democrats, had little power. The Republicans controlled Congress completely. They could override any veto. They could pass any law. They were looking for ways to limit Johnson. And Stanton was a perfect tool for them. Stanton stayed in his office. He did his job. But he also stood firm against Johnson. He often refused to follow Johnson's orders that went against congressional policy. He was a symbol of resistance. He was a clear sign that Johnson was losing control. Like Johnson felt he had a right to his own cabinet. Every president needs a team he trusts. A team that, follows his direction, but Stanton would not go and Congress did not want him to go. This standoff made Johnson look weak. It made him look ineffective. It fueled the anger of Congress even more. They saw Johnson as someone who could not be trusted. They saw him as a threat to their plans for the country, and they were ready to take drastic measures to stop him. Stanton was a pawn, but a powerful one in this high-stakes game. His presence in Johnson's cabinet was a daily insult to the president. It was a constant reminder of Johnson's lack of authority. And it was a direct challenge to the very idea of presidential power. Congress was getting fed up with Andrew Johnson. They felt he was obstructing their plans for Reconstruction. They saw him as a threat to the nation. They believed he was trying to bring back the old ways of the South. They wanted to make sure he could not do that. So they started passing laws to limit his power. These laws were designed to tie his hands. They wanted to make it impossible for him to go against their will. One of the most important of these laws was the Tenure of Office Act. Congress passed it in March 1867. This act was a direct attack on presidential authority. Before this act, presidents could usually remove their cabinet members. They could fire them whenever they wanted. This was seen as a basic executive power. A president needed a team he could trust. If a cabinet member didn't agree with the president or didn't do their job, the president could remove them. It was simple. But the Tenure of Office Act changed that. It said the president could not remove cabinet members without the Senate's approval. This was a huge deal. It meant the president could not simply fire someone he disagreed with. He had to get permission from Congress, and it specifically said that cabinet members appointed by the previous president and confirmed by the Senate would serve until the end of that president's term, or until the Senate agreed to their removal. Why did Congress pass this law? There were a few reasons. One big reason was Edwin Stanton. As we know, Stanton was Secretary of War. He was Lincoln's appointee. He was also a strong ally of the radical Republicans in Congress. They wanted to keep him in place. They knew Johnson wanted him out. The Tenure of Office Act protected Stanton. It made it very hard for Johnson to fire him. But it was more than just about Stanton. Congress wanted to make a point. They wanted to show that they were in charge. They believed Johnson was abusing his power. They saw him as a danger to the country. They thought he was too sympathetic to the former Confederates. They wanted to make sure he couldn't choose his own team. They wanted to control the executive branch. They felt that if Johnson had a cabinet full of his loyalists, he would be even harder to stop. They wanted to strip him of the tools he needed to act independently. The act was also a political trap. Congress knew Johnson believed the law was unconstitutional. They knew he would likely try to challenge it. They were daring him to violate it. If he did, they would have a clear reason to impeach him. Impeachment is a process to remove a president from office. It's a very serious step. Congress wanted a solid legal ground for it. The Tenure of Office Act gave them that ground. Johnson saw the act for what it was. He saw it as an unconstitutional power grab. He felt it was a direct infringement on his rights as president. He believed the president needed the power to appoint and remove his own cabinet. Without it, he could not govern effectively. He argued that the law went against the Constitution. He argued that it took away a fundamental part of the executive branch's power. He believed it was wrong for Congress to dictate who served in his cabinet. His advisors told him to be careful. They warned him that Congress was trying to trick him. They told him not to give Congress a reason to impeach him, but Johnson was a stubborn man. He believed in his principles. He felt he had to stand up for the presidency. He felt he had to protect the balance of power. He believed that if he let Congress get away with this, it would set a terrible precedent. It would weaken all future presidents. He was ready for a fight. The Tenure of Office Act created an impossible situation. So Johnson felt compelled to defy it. Congress felt compelled to enforce it. It set up a direct confrontation. It created the perfect storm for a constitutional crisis. All eyes were on Johnson. Would he dare to challenge the law? Would he try to remove Stanton despite the act? Congress had thrown down the gauntlet, and Johnson was picking it up. The stage was set for the showdown. It was no longer just about Reconstruction policy. It was about who held the ultimate power in the United States government. And Edwin Stanton was the pawn at the center of this battle. Andrew Johnson's patience with Edwin Stanton finally ran out. For months, Stanton had been a thorn in his side. He was a cabinet member who worked against his own president. He was a symbol of congressional power within the executive branch. Johnson couldn't stand it anymore. He felt humiliated. He felt he couldn't govern with such a disloyal figure in a key position. So in August 1867, when Congress was in recess, Johnson made his first move. He decided to suspend Stanton. He couldn't outright fire him yet because the Senate wasn't in session to approve it. But he could suspend him. He told Stanton he was out. Then Johnson appointed General Ulysses S. Grant to be the interim Secretary of War. Grant was a popular war hero. Johnson hoped this would make the move more acceptable. He also hoped Grant would be loyal to him. Stanton protested the suspension. He said he would obey the law. But he also quietly vacated his office. Grant took over. For a while, things seemed calmer. Johnson had a war secretary he thought he could trust. Grant had always seemed straightforward. He was a military man. He was not known for playing politics. Johnson believed Grant would support his policies. But the calm did not last long. When Congress returned in January 1868, the Senate quickly took action. They had to approve or reject Johnson's suspension of Stanton. The Senate met. They discussed the issue, and they voted. The Senate rejected Stanton's suspension. They said Johnson had no right to do it. This meant Stanton was still legally the Secretary of War. When the Senate rejected the suspension, Grant was in a difficult spot. He had been serving as interim Secretary of War. Now, according to the Senate, Stanton was back in charge. Grant did not want to defy Congress. He also did not want to be seen as defying the law. So Grant stepped aside. He returned the War Department keys to a staff member. He made it clear he would not continue to serve against the will of the Senate. This left the War Department in limbo, and it left Johnson feeling betrayed by Grant. Johnson thought Grant had promised to stay if the Senate rejected the suspension. Grant denied making such a promise. This created a public spat between Johnson and Grant. It further isolated Johnson. Johnson was furious. He felt Congress was deliberately trying to undermine him. He felt they were trying to run his administration. He was also angry with Grant. He saw Grant's action as a defection. Johnson decided he had to act decisively. He felt he had to reassert his authority as president. He believed the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. He decided to challenge it directly. On February 21st, 1868, Andrew Johnson formally fired Edwin Stanton. He sent a note to Stanton telling him he was removed from office. He then appointed Major General Lorenzo Thomas as the new Secretary of War ad interim. Johnson believed this was his right as president. He believed he was following the Constitution. He was daring Congress to do something about it. Stanton refused to leave. He barricaded himself in his office at the War Department. He locked the doors. He reportedly slept in his office. He did not recognize Johnson's order. He believed he was still the legal Secretary of War. He had the full backing of Congress. He told his staff to ignore any orders from Johnson or Thomas. For a few days, there were two Secretaries of War, one locked inside the office, one appointed by the president. It was a bizarre situation. It showed just how broken the relationship between the president and Congress had become. The news of Stanton's firing hit Congress like a bomb. They had their smoking gun. Johnson had openly defied the Tenure of Office Act. He had challenged their authority directly. The radical Republicans saw this as the ultimate provocation. They had been waiting for this moment. They believed Johnson had committed an impeachable offense. They quickly moved to act. The House of Representatives immediately began discussions. They started drawing up articles of impeachment. They believed Johnson had abused his power. They believed he had violated the law. The showdown was now official. There was no going back. The president was about to be put on trial by Congress, and the fate of the American presidency hung in the balance. The moment Andrew Johnson fired Edwin Stanton, the wheels of impeachment began to turn. The House of Representatives acted quickly. Just 3 days after Stanton was fired, on February 24th, 1868, the House voted to impeach President Johnson. This was a monumental decision. It was the first time in American history a president had been impeached. The vote was 126 to 47. It was a clear message from the House. They believed Johnson had committed high crimes and misdemeanors. The House then drew up 11 specific charges called Articles of Impeachment. The main charge, the most important one, was Johnson's violation of the Tenure of Office Act. Specifically, they charged him with unlawfully removing Edwin Stanton from the office of Secretary of War. They also charged him with appointing Lorenzo Thomas without Senate approval. Other articles accused him of making speeches that brought Congress into contempt and scorn. They said he had generally shown disrespect for the law, but everyone knew the heart of the matter was Stanton and the Tenure of Office Act. After the House impeached him, the process moved to the Senate. The Senate holds the trial. The House acts as the prosecutors. They present their case against the president. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Salmon P. Chase, presided over the trial. Johnson had a team of lawyers defending him. They argued that Johnson had not committed any high crimes or misdemeanors. They argued that the Tenure of Office Act itself was unconstitutional. They said Johnson had every right to test its legality. They also argued that Stanton was not even covered by the act. They said it only applied to cabinet members appointed by Johnson, not by Lincoln. This was a clever legal argument based on the specific wording of the law. The trial lasted for several weeks, from March to May 1868. It was a huge public spectacle. Everyone in the country was watching. People argued fiercely about it. Was Johnson a tyrant who deserved to be removed, or was he a brave president standing up for his office against an overreaching Congress? The radical Republicans were desperate to convict him. They wanted him out. They believed he was destroying their Reconstruction plans. They believed he was a danger to the nation. But the arguments for acquittal were also strong. Some senators, even some Republicans, worried about the precedent. What would it mean if Congress could remove a president simply because they disagreed with his policies? Would it make the presidency too weak? Would it shift too much power to Congress? They worried about turning a political disagreement into a reason for impeachment. They feared it would create instability. They also genuinely doubted the constitutionality of the Tenure of Office Act. Many legal minds, even outside Johnson's defense team, believed the act was a bad law. When it came time to vote, the Senate needed a 2/3 majority to convict Johnson. That meant 36 out of 54 senators had to vote guilty. On May 16, 1868, the Senate voted on the most important article, the one about Stanton's removal. The vote was 35 guilty to 19 not guilty. Johnson was acquitted by just one vote. One single vote saved his presidency. 7 Republican senators broke ranks. They voted not guilty. They were called reticent Republicans. They believed Johnson should not be removed from office. The Senate then voted on 2 other articles with the same result. They decided not to vote on the remaining articles. The trial was over. Andrew Johnson remained president. The immediate aftermath was relief for some and bitter disappointment for others. The radical Republicans were furious. They felt they had failed to protect the country. But others believed the Senate had done the right thing. They felt it had upheld the Constitution. It had protected the balance of power. Edwin Stanton eventually resigned from his post. He knew he could not effectively serve with Johnson still in office. His role in the impeachment drama was over. Andrew Johnson finished his term, but he was a president stripped of much of his power. And he did not seek re-election. His presidency is often seen as a failure. He struggled with Congress for his entire time in office. The impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson had a lasting impact. It defined the struggle between presidential and congressional power. It showed how difficult it is to remove a president. It also showed that future presidents would be wary of openly defying Congress. The Tenure of Office Act was later repealed. Many historians now agree it was probably unconstitutional. The trial left a scar on American politics. It reminded everyone that the checks and balances of government are always in tension. And it showed that even a cabinet member could become the focal point of a major constitutional crisis. It was a dramatic chapter in American history, one that nearly changed the course of the presidency forever, all because of a fight over who got to sit in the Secretary of War's chair.